It's a drug hit.
He had some type of a hazmat suit on.
And see through you, see your true color.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm Yos Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And, you know, over the last few days, I have been watching the testimony. I mean, there's many hours of it, of the guys that were convicted in the Holly Bobo case. And for those of you that have followed me for a long time, you know, I've actually mentioned this case a while back. And that case is so interesting, I mean, yet downright dastardly in many ways. And we will cover that. I mean, we've got to cover that because in a way it's an injustice, just like in the Idaho 4 case, but it's the opposite. It's the opposite story, which is very interesting. I mean, it's the story that you normally hear. The Idaho 4 case is the story that you normally hear turned upside down on its head. And what I mean by that is in the Holly Bobo case, and if you'd have to really dig in to truly understand what I'm saying, because this young lady's life was taken, and it was more than likely taken by one-off unaliver. I mean, this is a case where one of them did. They knew who it was. And after about 3 years, though, they decided to go ahead and prosecute 4 meth heads, basically. And these guys were out just terrors, and they knew it. So, I mean, it's obvious they wanted to get those guys off the street, and they wanted to use this case as a way to close the books on this case and then get them off the streets at the same time, because they were just out creating havoc, even though there weren't, you know, SA unalivers. And they took and got one of the guy's brothers and put him in jail, scared him into talking. They released him to a police officer. He was bonded out to a police officer living in the guy's house, and he was hammering him to get him to testify against his brother, got him to lie. Then they arrested the rest of them, got one of the other guys to lie, threatened him with the death penalty, so he lied, and then they convicted these guys, really just one of them, and sentenced him to life. And that was back in 2017. That was 3 years after the crime. Now his brother has told the truth and recanted. The other guy that they forced to lie, that really made up some stuff, he's come out and said, yeah, I lied. I lied about all of it. And now the post-conviction relief is starting to work its way through court. And their attorney that they have now, this guy has got a little bow tie on, and he's just a terror. I mean, he's in there hammering, and then they're putting the original prosecutor on the stand, and this guy's grilling her, and you can tell she's full of crap. And everything they did in that investigation was designed to get witnesses to lie about these guys. And that lady's a judge now, and he's going through. And anyway, it's so interesting. But it's the opposite. It's an upside down picture to the Idaho 4 case. In that case, they got all the local guys to lie, which they normally do, which I've talked about in like the Meister case and other cases around there in Moscow. In the Koberger case, they haven't gotten anybody to lie on Koberger. As far as we know, I mean, all they had was physical evidence, and he didn't match any of it. It's just insane. And in my humble opinion, they're covering up the Idaho 4 case for actually drug dealers. And in that case, they were wanting to prosecute the drug dealers when it was a one-off unaliver. Unreal. But I can't cover it right now, because if I step away from this case just for a few days, it's like the floodgates open to ridiculousness. And I'm not here to talk about anybody's content or anybody's theories on this case. What I'm here to do is try to bring everybody back on track and focus on what's real and not a fairy tale as it relates to the Idaho 4 case. And I guess I'm the only one that's qualified to do that. And I have qualified myself to do that because of everything that I've looked at in this case. And I've looked at everything in this case in triplicate over and over and over. And I believe that I've got the closest to the facts in this case. And when I see just things going off the rails, it's a little bit frustrating to me. So this video is a long time coming. I'm going to go ahead and do my best to try to get people back on track and just the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. If you just follow the facts, I mean, it'll tell you so much. You don't have to make up a bunch of BS. And let's go ahead and go back to the facts in the case. And the investigation in the case is one way to show us facts. And I'm going to cover quite a bit in this video, but I think it's important for me to cover this stuff because, I mean, I can't even watch the other stuff out there right now. I can look at the thumbnails and go, good grief. But here we go. I'm going to give you the facts. I'm not here to down anybody else's stuff. I'm going to present what I have, and hopefully it's compelling enough to get people back on track. Ready? Let's go. All right. First of all, just so you know, I'm currently going through the painful task of taking every day of the investigation from the atrocity all the way through December 31st, and then separate everything January and beyond after that. And I'm actually going through and putting in the dates of all of the evidence receipts, the dates that the evidence was pre-screened, the evidence forensics was completed, and then backfilling all of the police reports from ISP and MPD in the proper date folder of when they actually did the work so that I can see a true flow of the investigation. And I've completed quite a bit of it, but it is a long, arduous process because the way they released everything was in a PDF. And you have to literally go through every single page of everything. And anyway, once I have that all done, I'm going to have a very good view of everything I need to see in this investigation. Now, because I've gone through everything so many times, I've already got a pretty good view. But once I get this completed, it'll be a real snapshot. And the only one that I believe is going to give us the true view of everything in this investigation. But that's just letting you know what I'm doing now, and that's why it's taking me a little time in between videos, because I really need to get that done, because my goal is always to be as accurate as possible on everything. But I'm going to bring us back to some facts in this case so that you can know for yourself what content you're viewing that's actually leaning towards truth and what's fiction. And I'm going to start right here because until people really understand this point, they're always going to do what we used to call wiping their butts with hula hoops. They're going to continue going in circles. And if you wipe your butt with a hula hoop, sooner or later, your hands are going to get dirty. And when you go throughout the investigation in this case, you got to understand there were people that they considered persons of interest. Some they even considered suspects. Jack DeCore was the very first one, along with Dylan and Bethany. And you can be fairly certain of that because of the investigation that they did into Jack DeCore. I mean, Jack, they went through and went through his house and found blood samples and took blood samples, did forensic tests on them. That's unknown male C. Jack, they went through and took his phone, tried to verify everything they could about his location with his phone. They interviewed everybody that he was with that night, got statements from where he was. They interviewed Jack several times. They got his buccal swab. He was one of the very first people that they obtained a DNA buccal swab from. That's item 17 was DNA buccal swab of Jack DeCore. The first two that they obtained buccal swabs other than DeCore was Dylan and Bethany. That's item 18 and 19, Funk and Mortensen's buccal swabs. So these were the first people that they were looking to clear as possible unalivers in this case. And they did. They cleared them. And here's the thing that I think is the most important thing to consider when you're looking at all of these frat boys as suspects. there was 5 pieces of evidence that we now know were the main focus of excluding suspects in this case. Now, they went on to generate more evidence that they used to exclude suspects. I might mention Brian Kohberger never matched any of it except for one. So, but this was originally the evidence that they put together when you go through the forensic reports that they actually put together profiles on and started excluding people based on this evidence. You can bet this evidence right here pointed to the other perpetrators in the case. And that was item 1.1, the DNA that they pulled off of the knife sheath that they later said matched Kohberger. Item 1.4, which was a DNA profile they pulled off of the back of the knife sheath that was actually little blood dots that contained a mixture of Kaylee, Maddie, and an unknown individual. They used that to exclude suspects. You can bet that unknown individual was one of the perpetrators, and it was not Kohberger. He was excluded. They pulled DNA from under the fingernails of Maddie, Ethan, and Xana. And they created profiles. All those profiles contained the DNA of Maddie and Kaylee and an unknown. Ethan and Xana and an unknown. Xana and Ethan and an unknown. These were the samples that they thought was the perpetrator, and they were probably right because of where they found the samples, and they began excluding suspects from this DNA evidence. And the first suspects that they excluded from being contributors to that DNA was Jack, Bethany, and Dylan. So whether they conspired or part of the conspiracy process, you can't rule them out based off of physical evidence, but you can rule them out as being one of the unalivers based off the physical evidence, in my humble opinion. Then, their next suspects was Showalter, Cole Berenberg, and a guy named Connor Chestnut. I may not have the right Connor Chestnut here, but I think I do. He was a Boise resident, and he attended the University of Idaho, and you can tell he's not of an American or not of Caucasian descent. So I believe I've got the right one here. And they investigated these 3 guys from November 15th all the way to December 7th. And what's interesting is they were even in a different list of buccal swabs that they tested against the evidence in the case. Showalter, Berenberg, Chestnut, they obtained their buccal swabs. They cleared them as suspects on December 7th. They did not match the evidence in the case, guys. These aren't the perpetrators in the case that doesn't match the evidence. So, I mean, you can do video after video about Jack D and Jack Showalter, but they were cleared from the physical evidence in the case. Were they conspirators? Who knows? But they weren't the people that actually committed the atrocity based on the evidence. Then, and this one was interesting because when you look at the DNA that they took from all the ones I've talked about so far, there was a timeline between when they obtained the DNA and when they compared it to evidence. This guy, you can tell they wanted a hurry up job done on the DNA, because once they obtained his DNA, they created his DNA profile from cigarette butts and they compared him against the evidence. So he was cleared as a suspect on November 23rd, and that was Jose Cruz. The reason they went after Jose Cruz was real simple. Jose Cruz was the likely person that was involved in the 2021 incident of breaking into the girl's house with a knife and standing over her dressed in black. And he had done it in the past as well. So he was pretty good candidate to be a suspect in the case, but they cleared him. The next suspects that they put together was this list right here. And this list was put together and their DNA buccal swabs obtained and processed between November 28th and December 23rd. And this included Henry Clark, Kenneth Anderson, Donald McDonald, Mason Barstow, Jeremy Reagan, Coy Nguyen, Derek Abenganya, Patrick Butner, Corey Jalaboo, and James Deskins. So these folks were all tested against the evidence in the house and found not to be a suspect. So why keep digging into people that have already been cleared as suspects based on the physical evidence? Why not open your mind to what really went on in this case? Then their next round of people that they were going to test against the evidence, including Reed Upmore, was this group right here that we don't know and I haven't been able to identify yet. But these are all DNA buccal swabs that were collected throughout the investigation, and these were never tested against any evidence in the case. So if there's anybody that we know that we have a name on that was not tested against that information, that may be a frat boy, it'd be read up more. So he would be the only one that I would even suggest to even look at, and I'm not suggesting to look at him, but he's the only one that I know that they that they got a buccal swab from. They didn't test it against the evidence. So everybody else was, though. The Jack D's, the Jack Showalters, I mean, they're not the unaliver. They've been tested against the evidence in the case. So continuing to hula hoop that one is ridiculous. You think the FBI and the Moscow PD are going to cover up for Showalter and Decor? Come on, man. Now, when you get to people that you would really expect the evidence to be tested against, then you get into a conundrum. And that's where you get to people like this, like Kopaka, like Molly McMethy, and like Nicholas Mowich. They were never tested against the evidence in the case as far as we know. Certainly hasn't been released in any reports. When we look at the evidence around why they weren't tested, it doesn't make any sense. This is where I dig in, when things don't make sense. When any evidence is to be tested, for example, we know they had Mowich's DNA. We know that from the ISP police report. Right here, they requested a DNA buccal swab of Mowich's body. Now, the last thing we hear about this DNA buccal swab of Mowich on November 23rd is ISP Detective Lehman drove the swabs not to the evidence lab in Meridian. They drove the swabs to Moscow Police Department and placed them into evidence. And then it just says case continues. We never hear anything else about it. So ISP didn't take it to the lab. They took it back to MPD. So at that point, who's in charge of processing this evidence? Well, it should be the case agent, which was Brett Payne. However, we know now through email correspondence that Brett Payne skirted those duties and gave them to lead prosecutor Bill Thompson. Bill Thompson made all the decisions about what evidence was sent to the lab, what wasn't, and whether or not the lab could consume that evidence or not. We know that for a fact now. So why did Bill Thompson choose not to send Mowich's buccal swab to Meridian to have it tested? That is the real question. Then you've got Molly McMethy. Now, we know Molly was on the scene during the time they say the atrocity likely started, and everything she did on the scene was very suspect. Not only that, there was a massive investigation conducted between the FBI and the MPD to identify and locate Molly as the DoorDash driver, and we've been through this. They had to do geofence warrants, get usernames, do Google geofence warrants, zone in on that username, get phone warrants to find out the phone number that was used. And then they finally determined it was Molly and brought her in for questioning on November 23rd. Here's what's interesting. During that questioning, there is no report of them ever taking a buccal swab from Molly. There is 0 reports from ISP of any kind related to Molly McMichael. That should be a red flag right there. And then we have Brent Kopaka, which you would have thought that would have been the first person that they excluded as a suspect based on all the attention that we have given Brent Kopaka over the last 3 years. But we know that on December 14th that law enforcement unalived Kopaka. We know that Kopaka was named in MPD reports as a person of interest. Right here is a clip from the report where it says, in addition to this information, during my initial phone call with L, he told me he was painting the apartment of Brent Kopaka, the previous tenant. And right here, and persons named in tips during the initial investigation. The initial investigation, folks, is before they arrested Brian Koberger. So Brent Kopaka was not only a logical suspect, he was named in tips during the initial investigation. We have all the ISP tips, we think we do, where they chase down every lead. You've seen what they did to Jose Cruz. They put 4 ISP guys on him. staked out his apartment until they got a cigarette butt and could get a DNA sample and clear them. We never see any of this with Kopacka. How is that possible? And why is Kopacka not mentioned in any of the ISP reports? It's only an MPD report that we even see him mentioned. And it certainly wasn't ISP detectives that were staking out Kopacka's apartment. No, what happened to Kopacka? Pullman police went in there with a tank and unalived Kopacka. And during that assault, we know that they said, we have an arrest warrant and a search warrant for your apartment, which is not something you would typically have if you were handling a vet that was just a little bit out of his mind threatening his roommates. So we know that there's issues around this one. Yet all I see is Jack Showalter, Jack Decor. Give me a break, folks. And if that's what you put out there and you believe that, that's okay. But give me a break. So what I find when I go through all of the reports is I find a separation and a partnership. And what I mean by that is I see that the FBI and the MPD seem to work pretty closely together. And the ISP seems to be an outlier. And I base that just in this video on the fact that there is 0 reports about Molly in the ISP reports. There's 0 reports about Kopacka in the ISP reports. The only reports about Malwich is them turning over the DNA to MPD and then nothing happening after that. But we know there is close connection between the FBI and the MPD as they locate Molly. And it tells me that these two work together a lot closer than these guys. They were working real leads. These guys were chasing down every bogus lead that they would have them chase down. That is my humble opinion on the investigation. But when you think about things from these terms and going off into left field on the nonsense on people being cleared from the investigation, it just doesn't make any sense. And I wish I didn't even have to say that, but I look at all the videos out there and it seems like if I don't do a video for a few days, the hula hoops come out and then everybody starts hula hooping, and we'll never get any truth out by doing that, in my humble opinion. That's just my opinion. Not downgrading anybody. But I do see a lot of nonsense out there, and I'm going to put an end to this one right now. I've seen thumbnails. I haven't actually watched anybody's content, but I have seen thumbnails suggesting that, these victims were only 2 of them were unalived, or they were unalived somewhere else and they were brought back to the house. And okay, let's just look at the facts of the evidence that was actually released. And I hate to even do this, but when I see all that, I've got to. All right, this right here is Xana's bedroom, y'all. This is pictures that was released by NBC. And when you look in Xana's bedroom at the bed right here, I mean, you can clearly see there's no blood or anything over here except for blood that was splattered onto the wall. You see this right here and all this up here? I mean, there was an attack that went on in this bed. We know from the way that they found Ethan, he was hanging off the bed with his fatal wounds. And you can clearly see this was a violent attack on Ethan while he was in the bed. I'm sure he fought back, but he was in the bed when they jumped on him, which tells me a lot. And when you look down here and you start to see where the blood is pooling and the blood all over this nightstand, this isn't something that happened somewhere else and they brought Ethan in here, okay? Give me a break. And when you take a blurry backup look and you see this pool of blood right here from Ethan, give me a break. They didn't unalive Ethan somewhere else and bring him into the house. So people, can you stop saying that when you look at pictures like this? Let's get focused on what really happened in this case and not fairy tale stuff. This is one of the victims that was unalived right here. This was Ethan, y'all. Now, when you go up to Maddie's room, they didn't share this half of the bed in Maddie's room, but they did share this half of the bed. You can bet somebody was unalive. Look at the pool of blood. Somebody was unalive. They were attacked in this bed. I believe it was Maddie. They don't ever show us this other side. So the only one that's in any question is going to be Kaylee. But can we stop saying people were unalived and then brought into the house? Maddie was obviously, or Kaylee, one of them was obviously unalived in this bed. And then there's Xana. When you look at this picture and you can clearly see this massive pool of blood right here, right where they said Xana was found, Xana wasn't brought in from some other place where she was unalived and placed in the bedroom, because look at this pool of blood. Okay, and then that's 3 victims right there that we know were unalived in the house. We've got blood on the table and in other places and in all of the forensic reports that show a mixture of Kaylee and Maddie and somebody else, or just Kaylee. They were all unalived in the house. Here's the evidence for it. All that ridiculousness about them being unalived somewhere else and brought back in, they were only 2 victims. Come on. All the 4 was unalived in the house. Let's get serious if we're going to make videos on this subject. It really upsets me when I hear that stuff. Now, let's talk about something that has real merit in the case, okay? What has real merit in the case is nefariousness, in my opinion. And that's why, as I'm going through this stuff, I am literally looking for things that are rock solid that could be brought up in post-conviction relief, because I don't believe they have the right person for this crime. Not that the fairy tales that just drive me nuts. But here's another example of nefariousness in this case if you really stop and think about it. And that is the footprints found outside of Dylan's door. Now, they went as far in the probable cause affidavit to actually have the gall to list this footprint as its incriminating evidence against Brian Kohberger. And we remember this. During the processing of the crime scene, investigators found a latent shoe print. This was located during the second processing of the crime scene by ISP forensic team, by first using a presumptive blood test and then amino black, a protein stain that detects the presence of cellular material. The detective's shoe print showed a diamond-shaped pattern similar to the pattern of the Vans type shoe sole, just outside the door of DM's bedroom, located on the 2nd floor. This is consistent with DM's statement regarding the suspect's path of travel. They put this in the PCA trying to back up the little snippet they took of Dylan's statement to try to make it look more credible. And when you stop and you think about this, number one, right here it says that L4 is a possible shoe impression not analyzed. They never even analyzed the shoe impression, right? They later on went through and I can't find anything really where it determines they said it was a size 13 shoe. Now the shoes in the snow outside were size 13, but they didn't use those as evidence. They were talking about this one. But when you stop and you think about it, when they're talking about using the amino black test, that means that they didn't find, like it says right here, the first time they went through the scene, processed everything, they didn't find this shoe print. They found it the second time when they came back on November 19th and they started spraying amino black on everything. They found this print. Give me a break. When we watch the body cams of officers, how many of them? 4, 5, 6? The prosecutor and everybody else the day of the crime, they all went into the room with Xana and Ethan. They all went into the room supposedly with Maddie and Kaylee. There's blood pooled on the floor. If they stepped on anything, they all would have walked past the area by the door by Dylan's room. How many shoe prints walked past that spot before they went back on the 19th and sprayed amino black and found this shoe print? Give me a break. And they used it as evidence against Brian Kohberger to get the arrest warrant. Then, when I look at the Franks motion, this was one of the things that the defense brought up in Franks was the footprint outside DM's door. And then I look at the way that they worded the argument, and this is the judge's order on it, and the fact that he lists this, says the defendant challenges a false statement made in Payne Exhibit A about a footprint outside DM's door. And then he lists what Payne put in the PCA, and then it goes on to say defendant contends the last sentence is false, noting that the footprint, and then it goes on to talk about the location of the footprint in relation to Dylan's statement. Why would they make that argument instead of the fact that this footprint was not found until 5 days after the crime scene had already been processed, and then show body cam footage of the 10 different law enforcement and prosecution personnel that walked into the victim's rooms with blood on the floor and then walked past this particular spot. So when I see this is an excellent point to bring up in post-conviction relief. And that's real stuff right there, folks. Not the made-up BS that I see spread about this case that makes everybody out there think that we are a bunch of crackpots when they see it. Now, one of the things that hindered me for a long time was technology. For those of you that have followed me since the beginning, you know I used to sit here and talk, and you know I may pop up a PCA on the screen, or I may have a cork board behind me with little strings going to stuff. And yeah, you know, that's just, if you don't know how to do it, you don't know how to do it. But so what I learned was if I'm going to be accurate and really get to the bottom of things, I better learn how to do some things. And I think that's where some people out there that are very, very sharp on this case kind of get sideways, is because they haven't taken that extra step to learn how to navigate the computer and the evidence for themselves. And I mean, I had to go through and teach myself a lot. Like, for example, just maps for in general. A lot of people will just take a screenshot of a Google map or a Bing map. What I had to do was go through and learn how to find accurate maps that gave accurate depictions of the terrain. And one of the best maps I could find around the Tri-State area is if you actually go to the Moscow website, and they have a whole mapping area on their website, on their city website, and you can go through and look at utility mapping and everything else, and that gives you, and the mapping was mostly done around the time of the atrocity, so that gives you some of the most accurate mapping. But being able to do that, and then take video from like 1112 and Linda Lane, and actually, instead of relying on other people to break stuff down and base everything you're doing off of what they've come up with, I mean, actually learn how to do that stuff. Put it together, stare at it yourself, listen to it yourself. For example, I don't know how anybody, because I've stared at these videos for so long now, even the new ones that come out, and I stare at them. Y'all know I've been through the videos with the house where you can see the reflections. I don't know how anybody who could stare at that stuff half as long as I have not determine that the taillights of the vehicles, when you turn right onto the road in between King and Queen, you can see it in the windows. I mean, you can compare it to all the other vehicles that you know took the same path. There's about 10 different reference points where you can compare it. You can literally see in the windows when the taillights, you know where they're at when you see them. Yet people, I don't even know what they're looking at. They look at stuff and they come up with some really strange determinations when it's plain as day if you've looked at it long enough. And for example, like the black vehicle, I mean, people go to the police report in February where the guy says that he got home about 4:29. So, well, that's his vehicle. Look at the video yourself. If you look yourself, you'll see that vehicle never passes the King Road residence. Never. So there's no way it pulls up past King Road residence and parks. And once you really stare at it yourself, you do it yourself. Don't listen to other people. Do it yourself. Then you can get a lot closer to diving in on what's true. Because the second you listen to other people give their opinion, and if their opinion's wrong, guess what? It's going to send you in directions that are so far away from the truth, you'll never get back there. So I just implore people, and if I need to do a class on how to do that stuff, because I've had to teach myself, I'll be happy to do it just to help people along. But if all you're going to do is look at a printed off picture of a map and listen to somebody else's determination that has a very vivid imagination, it turns out, then you're just not going to get there. You're just not going to get there. And I need somebody other than myself to be doing this stuff that's accurate, that has credibility, to really start to get the word out. And if I don't get that, eventually I'll just continue to do it myself, I guess. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms. Let me know if you want to hear about that Bobo case, because watching that is very interesting when you start seeing what people in that profession on the prosecution side are willing to do to get a conviction. Pavarotti's out.